Mark did learn that Ms. Payne had made good on her word, however, because something finally changed regarding Johnny. His parents admitted him into a regular hospital, where they discovered that much of his illness was due to allergies. But it wasn't just hay fever. Johnny had a rare condition because his lungs were supersensitive. The allergies from the dust and pollen created a constant state of irritation within the air sacs themselves. So, given enough time, and left untreated, his condition could have become fatal. His family moved Johnny to another tribe further north of the state, and Johnny lived on another reservation, but one closer to a clinic that specialized in his type of illness. After Johnny left, no one from the school ever heard from him again. Mark never got so much as a thank you, let alone an acknowledgement, but if Johnny got the help he needed, that's all that really mattered. Anyway, Johnny's exodus was the only reason why there was an empty seat in the classroom to begin with. And now the new girl Jeannie would be sitting next to him. Her name reminded him of that same from TV Land, I Dream of Jeannie, and if of Mark could not have dreamed up a better replacement. Jeannie was so beautiful that Mark had to turn away as she walked towards him, and so that he would not stare, but that was almost impossible. Her beauty seemed magnetic. Mark thought Jeannie might have been one of the most beautiful 8th grader in the entire world. And that was also because she matured early, and already had the body of an adult woman. Mark had read somewhere that girls were maturing much earlier now than any time before in history. There was this theory that it was due to all the hormones and steroids they put in the cow's milk. Well, if Jeannie ate her frosted flakes, she was proof of that. She might have had the face of a 13-year-old girl, young, fresh, and innocent, but she had the mature body of a curvy, voluptuous vixen. Her tits were fucking huge. The contrast between her youthful, innocent looks, and her mature, well-endowed body, only enhanced each other that much more. Juxtaposition. Mark couldn't help but wonder, if Jeannie's body was as innocent as her face looked. But after she sat down, Mark began to have a hard time concentrating. He saw multicolored spots, and instantly developed a headache. The pain throbbed until he had to close his eyes. He rubbed his forehead, and then his temples, and he tried to relieve some of the pressure. If it got any worse, Mark thought, he might have cried out. And then suddenly he started to get flashes of images. They were about Jeannie, the new girl. Sometimes Mark got visions, for lack of a better definition. It didn't happen with everyone, he wasn't psychic in the broad sense. Usually it was just a female who Mark found extremely attractive. Sexually attractive. Sometimes the pictures were accompanied by a sound, or a feeling, but mostly they were just images. The last time this happened to him was with a blonde girl named Tiffany, who was the first girl who had ever given him oral sex. Aside from kissing a girl or feeling once or two up, since 4th grade, Tiffany the blonde was Mark's first sexual experience. She was one of the most popular and attractive girls at the school, but she was selfish, and ultimately visions of her leaving him broken-hearted always overshadowed any sexual desire he felt for her. Tiffany was ultimately deemed a selfish woman, and she would punish any man who loved her, even destroy him. Girls had conquests too. It was always the getting and not the having with Tiffany. Mark didn't know why Jeannie suddenly activated these flashing images the same as Tiffany had done before her. Was this a warning? Silently, as Jeannie sat down next to Mark, the pictures kept exploding off in his head like silent flashbulbs, one after another. Mr. Winters, can you give me the answer? Ms. Payne interrupted. Mark jumped back in his seat. His visions were gone. The story was over. Hearing Ms. Payne's voice brought Mark back to the present. To the here and now. The answer, Mark said, clearing his throat. Yes, the answer. Weren't you paying attention? Ms. Payne asked. Hell no, I wasn't paying attention, Mark thought to himself. How could she even ask him that with a straight face? Wasn't that the only reason why she called on him in the first place? Because she caught him not paying attention. Mark wanted to ask Jeannie out after class, but if Ms. Payne made him look like a fool, it could ruin his chances, and he hadn't even introduced himself yet. You never got a second chance to make a first impression. Not a good impression. I'm sorry, Ms. Payne, I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat the question again? Mark asked. Ms. Payne scoffed. Who shot our 16th President Abraham Lincoln? Ms. Payne repeated. That John. Telephone booth guy, Mark finished quickly. The entire class erupted in laughter. That is not funny, Ms. Payne said, to the class, enunciating each word carefully to let the room know she meant business. All of you quiet down this instant, she commanded. When the class quieted down, Ms. Payne returned and picked up exactly where she left off. You mean John Wilkes Booth? Ms. Payne corrected him. Yes, that's exactly who I meant, Mark answered. I guess Ms. Payne didn't want to look like a fool in front of the new girl either, Mark thought to himself. Then why didn't you say so in the first place? Ms. Payne asked, putting him on the spot again. What? Are you fucking kidding me? I gave you the right answer, now move on, bitch, Mark thought to himself. Why was Ms. Payne giving him such a hard time? Was Ms. Payne deliberately trying to embarrass him in front of the new girl? She had never acted like this before. Ms. Payne, you told us last semester that if we couldn't actually remember the answer, to associate something with it instead, like an image. So, I took the last name Booth, and I tried to link the answer to a picture that I could associate with his last name. And telephone booth was all that I could come up with. Telephone booth and John Wilkes Booth, Mark said, putting his two hands together into one for emphasis. Ms. Payne was both amazed and confused, the latter because she had never told the class to link words with pictures. Mark had made that up on the spot. There was a pause while Ms. Payne stood standing and was trying to remember when she had said that. Mark preempted a comeback before she could respond a second time. Look, Ms. Payne, I don't know why you're always calling on me. Unlike these snobby rich girls, I like your casual shoes, he said, pointing at them for effect and giving her the thumbs up for approval. Mark wanted the attention off him and back on her. It was gutsy gamble. Everyone in class, including Ms. Payne herself, with the exception of Jeannie, looked down at her shoes, and then, once she knew that she'd been had, she lifted one of them up to check the underside to see if she had anything stuck on the bottom. No, the other one, Mark said. Now he was pushing it. The entire class erupted in laughter again. This time she didn't yell at the room to quiet down, she waited instead patiently. Maybe Mark had earned that laugh. But before she spoke again, Mark panicked. Maybe he had gone too far this time, and he should have quit while he was still ahead. He couldn't help himself. he was still reeling from the images that he'd seen from Jeannie's past, and now his mind was racing into overdrive. Mark couldn't have stopped his mouth even if that meant a one-way ticket straight to the principal's office. Better to die a rebel than branded a fool. Now that the class was quiet again, a composed Ms. Payne with a Mona Lisa smile scanned the classroom. Her body language proclaimed, "I am the adult here, I will be the bigger person." Her tone and mood seemed much lighter when she spoke this time as well. "Well, I hope the rest of you will be able to associate pretty pictures with answers, because there's going to be a test next Monday, and you can bet that question will be on it." The entire class grumbled as if in protest, and then Ms. Payne stood in front of Jeannie's desk. "I'm sorry, honey, but that includes you as well." Jeannie nodded without looking up at her. Suddenly the bell rang, and everybody got up and filtered out of the class, and into the hallway. Mark straggled behind as most of the class disappeared. Some of the girls turned around to size Jeannie up again, before they left. It was common for Ms. Payne to leave for the teacher's lounge to refill her coffee during the bell in between classes. When she left with the rest of the class, Mark took this as a good sign. Kevin and Carlos, who sat together on the other side of the classroom, were waiting for him by the door, but Mark waved them on impatiently to leave, but trying not to be too obvious. He didn't need those two idiots sticking around, he needed to have Jeannie alone when he spoke to her. If they stayed, they would only try to make him look bad, and fuck things up for him. Jeannie didn't act like she was in a hurry either, so while she was taking her time collecting her things, Mark tried to keep pace, desperately thinking up an excuse to talk to her. Now that he had the opportunity, he had drawn a blank. When he couldn't think of anything clever, he was just going to say hi, before she got away, but when he turned to face her, she was already looking at him, and caught him off guard. He froze, as then he smiled. "Hey," he said. "You were funny," Jeannie said. "How do you mean?" Mark asked, smiling. Complimenting her shoes, Jeannie returned. "Yeah, but I wasn't trying to be funny. Ms. Payne really did catch me daydreaming," and then he checked the doorway to make sure she hadn't double-backed. "So, you were lying when you said you like her shoes?" Jeannie asked. "Oh, they're okay, but I'd wish she buy some new ones. She wears the same outfits on the same days, and sometimes the other kids make fun of her because of it, so I was really just trying to help her out." "Oh, really?" Jeannie said, smiling. "Yeah, some people can be so immature. Besides, I like your shoes a lot better," Mark smiled back. Jeannie laughed again. She hadn't been this nervous talking to a guy in a long time, but she did have on a cute pair of shoe boots on that were a fashionable style at the time. "Our homeroom teacher, Ms. Payne, is well named because she loves to try to cause me grief, every chance she gets." "You the bad boy, defending her?" Jeannie asked. "All right, maybe I'm exaggerating, but this time my distraction was legitimate," Mark answered. "What distraction was that?" Jeannie flirted. She didn't mean to sound flirtatious, but it came out that way and she couldn't prevent it when it did. "Well, for one thing, Ms. Payne's voice itself is a distraction. You ever hear the voice of the guy that does the Garfield the cartoon cat in the movies?" "Yes," Jeannie said. "Ms. Payne's voice is a little like that. She has no inflection, and for someone who has a boring voice, she sure loves to hear herself talk." "Are you sure you're not exaggerating again?" Jeannie asked. She's the reason I daydream. Jeannie, did you have a Miss Payne at your old school? Mark asked. Now it was Jeannie who looked at the doorway. Yeah, but her name was Miss Harp, Jeannie replied. Mark nodded. Jeannie laughed. And you, Jeannie? He said shyly. And me what? She asked. And you had me distracted, Mark replied. Why me? She asked. Why you? Don't you own a fucking mirror? It might have something to do with those two bowling ball titties strapped to your chest, he thought to himself. Well, it's not every day we get to meet a new student from a faraway land, and that's very exciting for these parts, Mark answered. Exciting? What do you mean by exciting? She asked. You're a mystery, Jeannie. Nobody knows anything about you, Mark explained. She noticed Mark was using her first name a lot, and he seemed very comfortable doing so. That was amazing considering they had just met. Even after I told you, and the entire class, my life story, Jeannie exclaimed. Yeah, I can't believe Miss Payne made you do that. I hate standing up front just to give a book report, let alone telling my life story to a bunch of strangers, Mark agreed. Oh, my God, Mark, I was so embarrassed. Please tell me I didn't look like a fool, Jeannie begged. No, you were cool, maybe a little shy, but for your first day, you did great, Mark complimented her. I have to admit, out of all my teachers Miss Payne was the only one who made me do that, Jeannie said. Mark moved in to whisper, she smelled of expensive perfume. It was intoxicating. I should warn you, Jeannie, Miss Payne is a real bitch, so don't take anything she does personal. I heard she even drinks in between classes. Jeannie laughed. This boy was hilarious. Thank you, Mark, Jeannie said, smiling. You're good at making a new girl feel better. Well, I wasn't born here either. I was a new student myself at one time, but even then, I had the luxury of starting fresh in September like everybody else. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to move in the middle of the year, Mark said compassionately. You don't know the half of it, Jeannie replied. Then give me your number and tell me the other half after school, Mark said, taking out his pen and waiting for her number. Wow, Jeannie thought to herself, how could she resist? My number, she balked, I don't even know you. Mark handed her his pen and paper. If you give me your number I can call you after school. I wish we had more time to talk. And then he turned around again to check the doorway. Jeannie stared at him, and behind those emerald green eyes, Mark could see her trying to decide if this was a good idea or not. He nodded slightly as if silently encouraging her. Mark, I don't even know your last name. Maybe we shouldn't rush into anything, Jeannie said. My last name is Winters, he replied, offering his hand so that she could shake it. She took it, but with the same side, she was left-handed. Yes, and I'm the new girl, Mr. Winters, you understand if I don't, Jeannie said a little defensively. Yes, I do, Ms. Winters, but I would like to be your first friend, I mean if you'd let me. Jeannie flipped over the front cover to write but stopped when she saw notes from a previous class. Can I write on the back page instead? She asked. Just write over the notes, Mark replied. Jeannie laughed as she quickly found a blank page and scribbled her number. Okay, there you go, Mark Winters, she said. He looked at her handwriting. Beautiful handwriting, Jeannie Winters. What did you say? Jeannie asked fearfully. Mark looked up at her. I'm sorry, I must have thought one thing while saying another. I don't remember your last name, Mark said disarmingly. Jeannie looked at him a little suspiciously, as she handed him back his pen. Grants, she said. Thank you, Jeannie Grants, Mark corrected himself, speaking her name correctly the second time. Jeannie never took her eyes off him while Mark put his notebook away and slung his backpack around his shoulder. Then he picked up Jeannie's pink backpack and handed it to her. We better go, Jeannie, Mark said, as he noticed the other students for the next class pouring in as he walked beside her. He didn't want to run into Ms. Payne again. Do you know where your next class is? Mark asked. Yes, I memorized my schedule, Jeannie said. Jeannie, I was just thinking, can you give me a specific time to call you, just so I don't wind up talking to your dad? He asked. Jeannie laughed. How about Saturday around noon? But that's 5 days away, Mark said. Right, let's not rush into anything, Jeannie smiled. Saturday then, it's a date, Mark confirmed. No, I didn't agree to a date, I just agreed to accept your call, Jeannie, she said, panicked, but inside she was lit up like a Christmas tree. She squeezed her arms tighter and closer to her chest. A date, she thought to herself. She had never been on a date, and then Jeannie started blushing. It brought out her freckles. Ms. Payne was returning from the teacher's lounge to her class with a fresh cup of coffee. She had just poured a shot of Bailey's creme from a disguised container that she hid in the back of the fridge. This would be her third shot of the day. She reminded lagging student to get to their next class before the second bell rang, but she was distracted, as she sipped her Irish coffee, and wondered if the mall was having a sale on shoes this weekend. End of chapter 1.